Hi, everybody. How we doing tonight? So if you're new to the chats and new to the channel, or whatever way you want to go and say it, usually I come on around 6:30. We usually talk until about 8 or so. Basically, after about an hour and a half of babbling like an idiot, I usually start to lose my voice, and shooting videos every weekend is something I like to do in order to keep you guys entertained. So at about 8 o'clock, we usually cut it off. I wanted to start this chat off with just kind of a 5-second thing. In one of my last videos, I ended up saying something about people talking like a bunch of babbling idiots during Wednesday night live chat and stuff like that. And basically what that comes down to is during all of this cornhole virus thing that's been going on, most of the live chats around, including the probably 30 or so different YouTubers that I follow. Finnegan's Garage would be an example of a larger YouTuber that I follow that does live chats occasionally. The chats have degraded to the point that they're not focused on what the channel itself was created around. And that's where the whole babbling idiot thing came from. If you've ever done wrestling or football or any kind of major sport, professional swimming, anything like that, there is not a coach in this entire world that doesn't all of a sudden decide to yell, "Hey, you bunch of idiots, get back to work, go do something, whatever." So I'm sorry that some people apparently ended up taking offense to that, and I'm sorry that apparently some feelings were hurt. That's where that came from. And unfortunately, we live in a world today where everybody wears their feelings on their sleeves and nobody decides to think about the context of which things were said. But anyways, that being said, I have had several of you reach out to me and talk with me about the idea of doing a live chat using StreamYard in order to be able to get other people up and do maybe interviews or discussions about builds or something along those lines. And I do like that idea. John is really into the idea of doing it also. So he would like to be able to go and do them, which means that it pretty much would have to go and be, it basically would have to be on a Saturday night. I'm thinking the last Saturday of the month would be a good goal, and only doing one of them a month. That way people can come up with different content that they want to be able to discuss and stuff like that. That being said, with John being involved, I will intend to go and keep the chat very, well, for lack of a better term, PG-13. If you want to get up on the chat and start cussing like a moron and stuff like that, I'll end up kicking you. It's just plain that simple. If you want to be respectful and talk about stuff, then we'll talk about stuff. If you want to go and come up and decide to go and be stupid, it is what it is. That's the reason why it is that I have an admin button. So I think at that point, we've discussed everything that we need to discuss starting off this chat, and we'll get down to starting to go down through the questions. So the usual thing that I do is most of the time people will post up a question over in the chat. I will fully admit that I have dyslexia. I am a really slow reader, and I do apologize if I end up reading anything incorrectly or I flip some letters around. Or for those of you that are out of country, if I mispronounce your name, I do apologize. I'm just a redneck from Maine, and I talk the way I talk, and I'm sorry. All right, let's see here. So Andrew, you and I were discussing in the chat before this came on. For those of you who don't know, usually I try to bring the chat up live about a half an hour before I actually end up on the actual screen talking. If you ever want to post up a question or you want to go and chat through that, you're welcome to go and do that. And you're also welcome to send me an email at any point. And if you have a Facebook account, there's the Redneck Computer Geek Facebook page, and you can send messages through that, and I check it about 3 times a day. So Andrew was talking about how he's got a motor, it's smoking, he's got a 19.5 horsepower Briggs and Stratton. And he wanted to go and get something the same size or bigger for his rig. And Andrew, I'm going to put a ballpark guess out there that machine happens to go and be using a single cylinder. The 19.5 is notorious for blowing head gaskets in the single cylinder. So I'm going to bet that's probably what you're discussing. Just to follow up on that, if you're dealing with those machines, that particular series of Briggs, you want to make sure you check your exhaust valves and make sure that they're seated correctly and everything. They're known for charring around the exhaust valve, and when you pull the overhead valve cover off, where the exhaust valve comes through, you want to watch for charring and make sure that the guide on the inside doesn't need to be replaced. Well, there goes our cat Pouncer. Let's see. It starts right now, just smokes so bad. Andrew, the next time that you start it up, have your filter off and check your PCV hose, even fully disconnect your PCV hose. And if your PCV hose, when you start it up, is shooting out oil and you're lacking oil in the engine, most likely you've got a blown head gasket. 9 out of 10 times on those singles, if they partially blow the gasket, that's exactly what you'll see. It'll be shooting oil out the PCV valve, and you'll see smoke because the entire interior of your intake will be filled with oil. Not always sparking, then sparking the next time. I'm assuming you're discussing coil problems. Check your gap and make sure that your gap is good on one that will spark sometimes and not spark other times. The other thing to check is heat. There are a lot of cases where coils, especially on Briggs and Stratton opposed twins, on Briggs and Stratton opposed twins, it's very common for the coil to heat up. And so you'll start, it'll run amazing. You'll cut grass for about 15 minutes and the thing will just dump. It'll die on you. And if you immediately stuff a spark plug in and spark test it, you'll find that it has an intermittent fire during that time. But if you come back a half an hour later, yet again, it'll start right up and run about 15 minutes. So if you have a consistent spark variation, a lot of times that can be the gapping between the coil and the magnet on your flywheel. So, hey, while we're talking about engines and stuff, you guys are constantly asking me about engine stuff, and I know a decent amount, but I'd like to go and give a shout out towards another YouTuber that may not be on you guys' radar, but ended up coming up on mine recently. His name is Pullerbear Ed. And if you look in the description of this video, you're going to go and see that I went through the effort of posting a link directly to his YouTube channel. I'd like to go and give a shout out to Pullerbear Ed and ask you guys to go help him get over the 1,000 subscriber mark. If you're watching this, please give him a subscription and tell him that RCG sent you. Pullerbear was one of the only pulling people that I was able to talk with about a problem that I have in a build I intend to be doing on RCG Racing soon. And he was willing to talk it out with me, explain exactly what the issue was. And he even was willing to go through the effort of coming up with potential ideas, solutions, and ways to work around my problem. And I always try very hard to go and give a shout out and reach out and help others when they help me. So if you're watching this, please take the time to go down, check out Pullerbear Ed. If you are an engine junkie and you want to see somebody create a Kohler that has more horsepower than your average Volkswagen Beetle and just insane capabilities. Go check out Pullerbear Ed. He's currently building up a Kohler twin cylinder right now for his pulling tractor, and the machine work that this guy comes up with in his own garage, and he's a down-to-earth builder like most of us. Please go double check and check him out. Definitely worth looking into. And like I said, tell him I sent you, because I really appreciate the fact that he helped me out. Red Devil Garage, I'm glad. You're welcome. You know, I spent a lot of time as a single dad type parent working on the whole thing and stuff like that. And, you know, I saw what happened with you. And so I figured I'd subscribe and, you know, watch and, you know, give any input or help that I can along the way. Recently, John and I went through a experience without housing, and I understand where you're at right now, and I'm pulling for you, dude. I hope you're managed to rebuild. But I'll tell you what, keep shooting video and keep documenting, keep growing and stuff like that. People love a comeback tour, and it's worth it to go and do on YouTube because it'll pull the people in. I support you, dude. I hope that you're able to rebuild bigger and better and badder than ever. Let's see. Mark's, I'm assuming it's Mark spelt with a C. Do any of you guys like home lights? I only own one, but it's awesome. I've had 3 different home light chainsaws, and there's an old saying that says you can't get any more homely than a home light, and that kind of was my experience with all 3 of them. The Remington little saw that I have right now and the Pullens and stuff, the Pullens have been way more consistent, and granted, they are definitely throwaway saws. You know, before you guys get all hater comment on the Pullens and everything else, totally, without question, agree that a Pullen is a throwaway saw. I mean, anything that's got all plastic cams and everything in it is definitely going to overheat and do some stupid things at some point. But as far as the average Joe is concerned, you know, I only cut basically about 2.5, maybe 3 cords of wood for myself every single year, because I'm just heating up the garage during work time and things like that. It does the average Joe's job. But as far as home lights are concerned, I've never had good luck with home lights. It just is what it is. You know, we all have our opinions based on what kind of horrible hells we went through. Let's see. What state do I live in? I live in Maine. And no, Maine is not part of Canada. You have no idea. As a YouTuber for the last 10 years, at least once a year, I have to get in an argument with somebody about whether Maine is part of Canada. There are literally people in the United States that are convinced that Maine is part of Nova Scotia. I don't know why, but seriously, there's some failure in our educational system, without a question. The number of times I have to explain where Maine is in the United States always astounds me. You know, granted, we're not New York and we're not Washington and we're not California girls and everything else, but man, the educational system is failing Maine, that's for sure. Let's see. Holy cow, you guys are blowing up the questions tonight. Let's get down in here. Let's see. It was running great. Oh, Andrew is coming back on his Briggs. It was running great for 3 hours. I was mulching leaves, then shut it off, won't start, went and jumped my other mower to pull it back to the shop and start it up. Yeah, go through what we were talking about earlier. Pull that filter, check your intake, make sure if it's coated in oil, you've got a blown ahead gasket. Keep going down through and do the usual checks. Let's see. Nei Kiloha. I guarantee I killed that name. I'm sorry. How is my day? My day is doing really good. I'm currently still working on cleaning out the garage. I have 10 years worth of being an alcoholic and destroying my own life that I'm still cleaning up from. And today alone, I hauled out. Did you guys see in the subscriber update the wheelbarrow that Jesse ended up repainting? Purple and orange and red and black. She bedlinered the interior, so that was good. But out of my garage today alone, I hauled 4 wheelbarrows full of tin iron to be able to go load up and put into my pile. I probably hauled, I'm going to bet, close to 500 pounds worth of why in the world was I holding on to this scrap steel out of my garage today. So I'm actually in a really good mood. I've cleaned out the entire area for where we usually do the second build for winter. I've almost got all the way to the back of the garage in one bay cleaned out, and I've got probably 2/3, give or take, of the area in front of the Monte Carlo cleaned out. So I'm doing really good. I'm going to be at the point that I can put some insulation up in the garage, which I have been trying to go and do for years, but as an alcoholic, I always drank the insulation money, so this year it's happening. Oh, I had somebody earlier in the chat was talking about the big giant white tractor. The big giant white tractor is coming back to the Redneck Computer Geek channel as going into winter project. So stay tuned on that if you're somebody that's been plaguing me. That tractor has a heck of a following. You guys are really obsessed with that thing. Yes, that tractor will be back as far as working on it and getting it ready and stuff like that. I'm not going to give away what's going on, actually. I'm going to wait until you guys see the video because I want to see whether you ultimately hate what I did or whether you end up liking what I do. So it'll be back. It'll be back probably in the next couple of weeks as long as everything goes right. Oh, for you guys that are following to go and see me build a faster hydro machine, I got some bad news for you. The hydro that I've been playing around with, I actually managed to screw it up pretty bad while I was hauling probably about 600 pounds worth of crushed rock with it. Granted, I probably should not have taken a sped up hydro that was modified to do 12 miles per hour and been hauling 600 pounds worth of rock with it. Plus, I hauled the carcass of several lawn tractors with it, and I probably hauled about 500 pounds worth of scrap metal in another haul with it. And I hauled 6 other dead machines across the yard with it. So we'll be doing something to do a video with that, but I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to reword it because I was going to show you guys it doing 12 miles per hour, but now it currently makes really bad noises that it's not supposed to make. And so I think what we're going to do is do a mishmash video of this is what happens if you speed one up after I did this mod. Let's see if we can bring it back to life one more time. Something like that. We'll see if we can do a Frankenstein build because I've got 2 or 3 of those transmissions kicking around for parts. So maybe we can Frankenstein it back together and end up doing 12 miles per hour at the end of the video. I don't know. We'll see what we can do. That's the problem with experimental builds and junkyard builds is sometimes they just don't go right. And that's part of being a YouTuber. If you're going to get into doing this, you've got to be able to take the hits. And sometimes you're going to build stuff, and sometimes you're going to talk to people about it. You're going to say you're going to go and do a video, and then the very week before you're about to go and do the video, everything's going to blow up. That's just the way YouTuber life is sometimes. And that's the way it is in junkyard life in general. Let's see. Josh says, I am replacing a 12 horsepower Flathead Briggs from a 89 with a 2010 12.5 horsepower overhead Briggs in my 89 MTD grass cutter. Well, that should work out pretty good. The only thing you might run into there, you know, just as a passing comment type thing, is you might end up having to go and swap in a throttle that's made to go, depending on which 11 horsepower Flathead you had, some of those, the throttle cable goes up and down in them, and almost all of your overhead valves engines, it goes horizontal. So depending on which one you've got going on there, you might have to swap out your throttle cable. And the other thing is you might have had a independent choke cable on the 11 and have to go and use a throttle cable that has a choke overage on it. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to be called. I call it a choke overage, but I don't really know what the term is for that. Because there's throttles, and then there's the ones where you go over in order to choke them. And I'm not really sure if there's actually a technical term for that. Maybe one of you in the comments will be able to tell me. Let's see. What do you think I should name my something trick build? I think you should name it whatever name comes to term. Honestly, most of my builds usually come into a play on the words of the original machine. Mud Wizard. Say what?
Not Bouncer.
Yeah, Bouncer was a different one. Didn't you name Bouncer?
Yes.
Yeah, see, Jesse named Bouncer. See, you know, you get a woman involved and all of a sudden the name comes out of nowhere.
No, it's Bouncy.
Yes, I know it's Bouncy. I'm just being me. Most of my names ended up coming from a play on words to do with the machine, either whoever the original maker was. Mud Wizard, it was originally a wizard. Maine Mud Mower was a play on the fact of where my state is, and that nobody ever spells Maine with an E for Maine, the state. They always end up spelling it wrong. You know, MTD, Mud Terrain Dominator, it was built off of an MTD chassis and stuff like that. That's where a lot of my naming ends up coming from, is I like to do a play on words with the original manufacturer or something like that. And a lot of times I will collect parts for a build and pile them onto the machine that they're going to be built and stuff. And as I'm walking by one day, all of a sudden it'll just pop into my head. I don't have some scientific name calculator for you. I'm sorry. I'm not like those old school RPGs where you can't think of a name for your warrior character and you click on a button and it gives you a random name of cooldom.
I go with what my license plate initials are.
Mm-hmm. Let's see.
Or naming my vehicles.
Dante, I have an 18 horsepower V-twin Cowie with 2,000 hours on it from 2004 on a Husqvarna YTH. Do keep in mind with a lot of those hour counters, and I'm not trying to discredit you, but with a lot of those hour counters, especially on those Husqvarnas, the counter actually counts as long as the ignition is turned to the on position, and it doesn't actually care whether the motor is even running. That's the reason why it is Husqvarna tractors with those stupid counters. I actually remove the keys out of them and I hang them up in my garage, because otherwise, if somebody sits on it, aka John, and plays with the ignition and leaves it there, that thing will literally sit there and scroll that hour counter until the battery dies. And so a lot of those YTH machines, they have insanely high hours on them that don't actually exist on the motor. That's part of the reason why I like to watch for YTH machines that have somebody that advertise the hours, because most of the time those motors don't have anywhere near the number of hours that they claim that they do. Let's see, my throttle cable linkage came off of engine. Now it vibrates off the engine when it revs high. I would check that your screw going into the side where it holds your throttle linkage is actually going in and staying, and isn't partially stripped out. I've seen that happen a lot on newer Briggs and Stratton opposed. Briggs and Stratton V twins and the large single cylinder Briggs and Strattons. I've seen quite often that they will partially strip because the metal bracket that they go into is a press tap, and it's not very thick sheet metal. So even just changing motors, sometimes you can end up stripping that out and have to go back through and change it out. What I do if those are stripped out is I actually take a self-drilling or a self-tapping screw, depending on how you want to word it, and I cut the drill bit off the end of it, and I drive that through, and usually that'll hold it perfectly fine. On a side note, if you're ever actually missing entirely that stupid retainer, if you take a self-tapping screw, cut the head off like I just said, and then you take a large washer and you bend it in half so that the washer looks like this, you can put your line through it and use the washer with the tapping screw in order to be able to put it on. I've done that as a junkyard fix many, many, many times. Actually, the original main mud mower had a throttle cable like that because it kept stripping out. Ryan, can I put a push lawnmower motor on a riding lawn mower? If you're trying to just putter around your house, the answer is yes. You're probably going to have to drill your own mounting holes. You're going to have to make sure that that shaft is centered to where it needed to be for the original. You're also probably going to have to go and buy a different pulley. Most of your push mowers are usually 7/8 shaft, and that's done on purpose so that people don't do redneckery like we do. So double check what your shaft size is. You're most likely going to have to drill your own mounting holes. Center, center, center. And did you get the hint? Make sure it is centered where it needed to be as best as possible. And measure for your pulley size and double and triple check it before you buy one. You can get 7/8 shaft pulleys. That's what we did for the tractor that we built for John. We're going to actually get back to working on that one, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I want to do that as a winter project with him. And the reason being is because John really likes playing with the electric stuff during the summertime. And so we tend to switch to gas projects during the winter time when you can still go take it out for a test drive and romp it around and stuff. Let's see. Let's see. I have a Craftsman 12 horse from 1984, and every time I start it, it makes a grinding sound on the flywheel. What could be wrong? Well, you got a bunch of different things there. So if it makes a grinding noise and the grinding noise continues to stay, then you probably have something going on either in the flywheel itself, either a magnet that's come loose, or something in the shroud that is there and hitting. If the grinding noise is only happening during the time that you're trying to start it, you should probably check your starter and find out whether you have one of the older starters that has a metal starting gear. And if it has the metal starting gear, a lot of those can wear to the side, and they eventually will make a really horrible grinding noise. And what will eventually happen is it will grind itself sideways and wear itself enough that it will eventually come up and it will jam into the flywheel and it won't start at all. That is what I would check into if I were you. Dante put up a good comment also as far as that was concerned. If it is old enough that it has the ignition aperture that is underneath the flywheel, then it could potentially be that that is grinding on the inside. For those of you who don't know, though, you actually can order the coil for a more modern flathead that does not have that, and you can convert it over to a coil with a toggle kill. That's what I ended up actually doing. I didn't decide to show that to everybody because I didn't feel like getting into the argument about whether I should have tried to fix it correctly. But if you go to check your coil and check the firing and stuff, and you see two wires going out from the coil in underneath your flywheel on a flathead, most likely it has points in underneath the flywheel, and you can swap those over to a 12 horsepower Briggs & Stratton flathead coil that does not have that. And that is what I would recommend doing on that circumstance rather than dealing with the points assembly. Hey, Parts and Pieces, glad to go and see you kicking around. Drive safe. Don't pay attention to my dumb, stupid, idiotic self-talking here. I don't want you to crash. You've been dealing with stuff. You're working on stuff. You're making it go. Don't ruin it by crashing. Listen to this guy babble, okay? Just be careful there. Oh, hey, where we're at 7 o'clock and I've seen that a whole bunch of new people have come in, I would like to go and do a shout out towards another YouTuber, if you guys don't mind. Down in the top of the description, there is a link for another YouTuber's channel. His name is Pullerbear Ed. I actually have a build that is coming up on RCG Racing, and I reached out to a bunch of different people that do pulling and stuff like that. And Pullerbear Ed was one of the people who decided to really bring me in, talk with me, and discuss what I knew my problem potentially was with my next build. He also went through the effort of talking with me in order to figure out what potentially I could do in order to solve this situation. And actually, as Henry has said in the comments, there was also Twisted V Twin was also in on the discussion and discussed everything. I apologize, I forgot about Twisted V Twin. So please, if you have a chance, go to Pullerbear Ed, give him a subscribe. He is really close to getting over that 1,000 subscriber hell of a thresh mark that YouTube requires now. And I'd really like to go and see him manage to make it to that point. He was really good to me. And if you want to learn engine stuff, I mean, I know a little bit Like I know a thimble of tea compared to this guy's entire teapot worth of engine knowledge. He's doing a V-twin build right now that is bonkers for pulling. I'm following it. I love watching his videos. He's doing really good. He hasn't been on YouTube overly long, but he's getting very fluid on his videos, and they're fun to watch. So I thoroughly endorse him. I thoroughly hope that you guys go and subscribe, and let's punch him up to that 1,000 subscriber mark, because he definitely is teaching everybody what he knows, and he's just a really good guy in general. So I just wanted to go and give that little moment here while we're at the 7 o'clock mark and ask you guys to please support him. But now on to the next thing. Mac wants to know, what lawn tractor do I recommend for a first mud mower build? I really recommend, sorry, what was that?
Bouncy.
Yeah, actually, Jesse's not wrong. She said bouncy. Bouncy is actually based off an AYP. No, bouncy is actually based off of a GT 4000, a newer version in the 2000s. It is a hydro machine, but it's a hydro machine with a 5-lug adaptation on it, which means that it takes some really giant tires and does pretty good in the mud if you've seen over on the RCG racing stuff. But as far as if you're trying to build something that's capable of 20 miles per hour and you want to build on a budget, the easiest tractors without question in my mind to be able to modify quickly into mud mowers would be anything that's an AYP chassis. The Lt1000 is the one that I usually tell people to take a look at and target and understand how an Lt1000 Craftsman is built. That is an AYP frame. There are wizards that are based off the Lt1000, and now in modern tractors, you have the Pulley Pro 6-speed, which is based off of the original Lt1000. The Pulley Pro is actually more rugged than the original LT. The frame has been changed. It also has the newer 2nd-gen Craftsman steering, and it is capable with very few modifications of doing 20 miles per hour, a little bit more depending on which transmission you have. The one thing that I always tell everybody is keep your pulley swap for a first time build on a 1-to-1 ratio. And what I mean by that is if you put a 5-inch pulley, which is what I usually recommend on the engine, put something like a 5 or a 6 on your transmission. That's going to put you at around 18 to 20-ish miles per hour, depending on a 5-speed versus a 6-speed transmission, depending on whether you may or may not have one of the spicers with a high 6 gear. Some of the 4300 series spicers, the 6-speeds, they have a very high 6 gear, and it is significantly 2 or 3 mile per hour faster than an MST 206, which is what the drag racer guys have discovered, which I never knew until working with the drag racer guys. And so figured I'd pass that on. At that 20 miles per hour, when you are in top gear, is when you are going to start finding your tractor's faults when it comes to steering linkages and everything else. At 25 miles per hour is when you are going to figure out exactly how fast you can turn, have your steering jump, and go into a ditch. As a learner on mud mowers, that is something that you have to learn to deal with and you have to learn to fix, is your steering. And you will not notice it until you hit 20. So that's what I usually tell people. Play around with that idea first, then go bigger. The easiest way to do a 1-to-1 pulley ratio is just take your 2 upper deck pulleys. The deck pulleys, just pull those off those spindles, weld one onto your transmission, and weld one onto your engine drive pulley on the top, and go for it. I I've done it on many, many, many craftsmen at this point. I can see that some people are asking for shout outs, and I understand trying to grow a channel. Unfortunately, I don't do shout outs for everybody, or else my videos would just turn into a big giant, how many names can we say today? At 100,000 subscribers, I probably get asked on any given day for a shout out at least 5 to 10 times. Could you imagine if after 5 days I included every single one of those as part of a video? You wouldn't want to watch it. Keep building your channel. Keep advertising your channel in places that are relative and have something to do with your channel, and it will naturally grow. Oh, I gotta see if I can get caught up here. What do you think of Yard Pro riders? Is Yard Pro the one that's also like an MTD? I don't remember right off the bat. Give me 5 seconds here. Yard Pro lawn tractor. Oh, Yard Pro is the one that's an AYP knockoff also. I have no issue with Yard Pro. Yard Pro is kind of like the Ropers. They didn't really take off as good as they should. A lot of your Yard Pros are based off of Craftsman bases, so I have no issue with that. Sorry about the burp there. Apparently the ginger ale's got a little extra in it. And I have no idea why it is you guys always ask me what's in my Redneck Computer Geek coffee cup here. But tonight it is, focus, vanilla caramel black tea. I like vanilla caramel black tea, just so that everybody knows, if you want to go and randomly go and send me a box to my P.O. box. That's what I like when I'm chilling out and talking with you guys and stuff like that. I used to drink coffee during these chats and stuff like that when I would go live, and I found that the coffee was drying out my throat too much. But the black vanilla tea, caramel, whatever stuff, definitely seems to go and work for me. Let's see. James says, John's a natural on YouTube. Well, that depends on how many takes it takes. Ironically, the video that I just did of John and his little, he calls it his mini garage. I call it a shed. But, you know, we all got to have dreams, and I'm not going to dishearten him on the idea that it's his little mini garage. But on his little mini garage, that actually was entirely one take through the entire video. Everything he did just talking off the cuff, and he's getting a lot better. As he is, ironically, the more that he interacts with watching my videos, the more he actually starts to understand the concept of projecting towards the camera, and he, you know, dad proud moment, he kind of mimics me, you know? So
It's only good sometimes.
he is doing really good at trying to go and project towards the camera and trying to be more focused when he's talking to the camera. And as you guys have noticed, and a bunch of you have pointed out, Jesse is doing really way better at doing the camera angles and the shots and stuff like that. She definitely stays on point with the camera now. So, you know, I've got a hell of a good crew going on. It's great, and definitely makes a giant difference in being able to do the videos, I'll tell you. Let's see. Jason says, hey, my John Deere Sabre that I got for free, transmission will barely move. Jason, if that Sabre is a hydro, I think most of those Sabres are 316 hydros, if I remember right. And those have a top fill and a bottom drain. And they take, oh, I know somebody's going to go and end up telling me I'm wrong. I believe off the top of my head, I believe it's 2050 oil. They are notorious for burning up oil and progressively getting slower and slower and slower. They're one of the transmissions that does not have a significant reservoir of oil in the transmission. They're as cheap gets. And so they tend to burn up the transmission fluid. And I'm pretty sure, I know somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure a 316 takes 2050. It's either 2050 or 2040, and I know the comment section is going to tell me whether I'm right or wrong here. Let's see. Charles, my dad's is driving me nuts. I must have missed the context of that statement. You must be working on something. I missed the context of where the dad is driving me nuts came from. Let's see. All right, let's see. I was trying to start my Bolins, and when I pulled it, and as it makes a very weird sound when I try to put makeup grinding. What? Okay, I can't translate that one. Sorry. Let's see. Oh, apparently somebody understood what was going on there because they answered that apparently she needed to check underneath her deck and see if there was something that was clogged and hitting. Okay. Hey, honey.
Yeah.
James says you're cute.
Denied.
My girlfriend says denied. She likes to be a brat.
Double denied.
All right, let's see. Mower Man, just so you know, when people are talking about my white tractor by MTD, they're talking about a really old one that I picked up in a $50 deal this summer. It is a full-size Eaton Hydro with a shaft drive. It's an actual tractor, not a little MTD Very Drive FNR setup. That's the reason why it is people are plaguing me and coming into the chats and asking if I will please work on the white tractor. It is a pre-MTD white tractor. That's the reason why people are coming in. I noticed you were saying something about the whites, so I figured I'd clarify there. Let's see. Nordic. I own a very rare Wizard 18 horsepower lawn tractor manufactured in 1994. Any chance you've ever owned one? No, but I do race against one at the drag races, actually. I'm pretty sure, well, actually, I don't think it's a 94. I think if I remember right, he said it's a 96. But I race against a Wizard that was an 18 horsepower opposed twin at the drag races. If you go back on RCG Racing and you look through, you'll see that he's racing in the small mod class. So he'll be about midway in the videos. Why do hydro transmissions quit when you pulley swap or engine Revit? The reason for that is because a hydro has what's called a diversion valve. And what that diversion valve does is when it starts pumping fluid faster than the motor feels that than the manufacturer felt that the motor could handle, the diversion valve is actually pushed closed by the flow. And once that happens, until the revs come back down or the flow comes back down, it stalls out the motor in order to save itself. So the only way to actually make a hydro faster by spinning it over faster is A, figuring out what fluid to upgrade it to, which I've been trying and failing at. Also, you have to manage to remove that diversion valve. Otherwise, it doesn't do you any good to spin it faster. And actually, ironically, because of that diversion valve, when you spin it faster, it causes the pump to back pressure, which causes the pump to overheat, which kills it sooner. And that's the reason why it is everybody says do not pulley swap a hydro. Because unless you do the internal work on a hydro, it is a waste of time to pulley swap them because the diversion valve will always end up canceling out every bit you do in the pulley swap. Charles, I wish you lived closer. I have a Jacobson 1450 Lawn Chief I would like to give to you for your channel. I appreciate that.
Where do you live?
I get a lot of offers. That whole people don't understand where Maine is thing. The other weird thing about Maine is that for some reason people sometimes think it's in the same place, or they swap Maine with Michigan on the United States map. I haven't quite figured out how people do it. But I get people that are either in the state or below the state of Michigan asking me if I want to come get something on a road trip all the time. It's always funny to me. People just do not get where Maine is. So I appreciate the offer, and hopefully you can find some way through YouTube to be able to work on it yourself and get it up and running. I don't do older machines usually. I do have a couple that I intend to work on, but that's because they hold a soft spot in my heart. Either that or John is really interested in them. I don't tend to get very fired up over older machines. They have no value in the state of Maine. Even collectors' machines up here sell for scrap metal price. It's really sad up here. Like I've watched fully restored Bolin 66s up here sell for like $300, when down south I've seen the same thing advertised for like $800 with the collectors. It's really weird up here. Yeah. All right, let's see if I can get scrolled down through some of these. All right, you guys are apparently having a discussion about overtopping oil. You have to severely overtop a lawn tractor motor most of the time in order to go and cause problems. So I'll let you guys sort that one out in the comments and stuff, because it looks like you guys got that stuff figured out. Let's see. Frogger's Garage. I put a 212 Predator on a moped. Now, is it a moped or a pedal ped? Because ironically, people don't understand that there's a difference. So a moped is a singularly engine driven that has to be below 49 cc's in the state of Maine. And a pedal ped, which is what my Moto Beacon from 1977 is, actually has a set of bicycle pedals that are there in case your 49cc engine dies. And the problem is the 49cc engines that were on those, they're Italian and they were discontinued, and the manufacturer of them was bought out about 4 times before they just plain said entirely it just doesn't exist anymore. So I actually have a Moto Beacon that sooner or later I'll get back to and try and restore. That, unfortunately, I got it up and running, and I put one of those Chinese bike motors on it, one of the 80cc kits, and I went to work, and somebody that was visiting my house decided they were going to drive it, and they crashed it and they totaled it. And I literally never even made it out of my driveway with it fully rebuilt and ready to go. Yeah. So sooner or later, I got to go and get back on that. I'm getting closer to having it dug out of my garage. It's been buried in my garage for going on 6 years now, and I'm within a couple of feet having it dug out. We might take a look at that sometime this winter. Let's see, James W. Have you ever bought any of your tractors from Uncle Henry's? So for those of you who don't know what Uncle Henry's is, basically Uncle Henry's is a weird little advertisement book. They do also do an Uncle Henry's online if you want to go and Google it. And basically it's aimed at, I believe it's New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, if I remember right. Have I bought stuff off of Uncle Henry's? I did years ago. There are several of my tractor hunt videos from about probably 4 years or so ago that were off of Uncle Henry's. The problem is Uncle Henry's tends to be A, overpriced, and it's an older gentleman's market, and it tends to be a lot of older gentlemen that just don't have anything else better to do. And so stuff tends to be priced a little bit high so that they can dicker for a month before ever selling the stupid thing at the price it should have been. And I just don't have time for that. On a side note, though, I do buy several machines a year, usually off of Craigslist. Not so many this summer. I actually only bought 2 machines, I think, this year off of Craigslist. Craigslist yet again usually tends to be they price it higher than they're really ever going to sell it for, and you tend to have to negotiate for a couple of weeks before you end up actually buying the item. So I don't tend to deal with Craigslist any more than I have to for that reason. So I just saw the live counter kick over to 1 hour here, and I just want to put it out there. If you're new to this chat, I usually stop at around 8 o'clock. I will try to go down through and I'll catch as many of the comments as I possibly can in the next half an hour. But I just wanted to let you know that I usually tend to end at 8 o'clock when my voice starts to drop off. And I still need to be able to shoot video the rest of this weekend so that you guys can have something to watch while you're bored, stuck at home dealing with this stupid cornhole virus. Let's see. Let's see. Carlin Nathan says, I like clever names too. Yes, I like play on words type names. I like play on the name names. That sound a little redundant, but you get what I mean. All right, let's see. All right, I'm sorry that I went silent. I'm trying to catch up on this thing. Yeah, look at this. These all read perfect. This is what I hate about cars and technology and everything today. Yes, I'm a computer geek, but I started during computers back when you could fix things with a soldering iron. And this drives me nuts. I have been trying for the last 2 days to see if I can find a BMS that I could at least hotwire onto this thing so that I could charge it in order to be able to continue using it. You know, Skill's not going to like the idea, but seriously, if I can buy another 5 amp later on, I'm going to take one of my other 2 amps and I'm going to see if the BMS that's on my 2 amp fits. And I'm going to soldering iron that BMS onto there and see if it'll upgrade it. Because this is stupid. This is dumb to me. That no matter where I look on the market, I can't find one that's rated for 20 volt. I can find 12 volt all day long and everything else. I can't find a 20 volt BMS. Clarification. I can't find a 20 volt BMS with a USB charge port. That's the thing that I'm looking for right now. For those of you who are, you guys who like to research and you like to go and be helpful and stuff like that, I'm looking for a lithium BMS that'll do a 20 volt setup like this that has a USB charge port. And that way I can re-engineer that and be able to use it. Because otherwise, that's my only choice. My only choice is to take a 2 amp and see if that board is exactly the same as the 2 amp battery. Which is my theory. My theory is the 2 amp board is exactly the same as the 5 amp board, which is the reason why it is on the Amazon reviews. All of the ones talking about what this thing does, they're all 5 amp batteries, not 2 amp batteries on the sales thing. Just my 2 cents. Let's see. Wow, you guys are still discussing the whole oil thing. This is one that I always get all the time. Is should I run insert oil numbers here? Go by what the engine maker says based on the temperature you are running the engine. That is the only way you get a real answer. To be quite honest, if it's got a 30 at the end of it, I probably have run it in a lawn tractor motor and been perfectly fine. I do tend to run 530 through most of my stuff if it's going to be running during the winter. Occasionally, I will even thin it out even further by putting in about a quarter of it with Marvel Mystery Oil in order to continue lubing up everything and getting into the piston rings and reseating everything and stuff like that. The real reality is, unless you're dealing with freezing temperatures or you're dealing with above 80 degrees, if it's got a 30 in it, it probably will work fine. And then there's always the argument that pops up about whether using synthetic versus real actually makes a difference and all this other kind of stuff. The only thing that I will tell you does happen sometimes. If you have a motor that consistently spent its entire life running on real oil, and it has on a vertical shaft motor, and it has a seal in the bottom of it that is even remotely leaking, if you put synthetic in it, I guarantee it leaks worse. Synthetic will get into little itty bitty seepy places that regular oil will not. And so if you already have an oil leak, don't do the stupid thing of throwing in synthetic thinking you're helping it. You're actually making the situation worse. My tractor does not idle down all the way. Every time I bring it down to slow, it's on middle on speed. I'm assuming what you mean is it'll come down to a certain point and then sticks there. And usually that's a carburetor problem. The other thing that I've run into recently on a regular basis is really cheap carburetors where the choke blade doesn't actually disengage or re-engage appropriately depending on which way you're going. And the other thing that I've run into is on high hour machines that the governor spring over time will end up stretching, and it'll cause it to refuse to come down onto a full idle. But 9 out of 10, it's usually a carburetor that needs cleaning. Let's see. My tractor literally won't start without choke since it has gravity-fed gas lines. I like gravity-fed because you're less apt to flood it. Actually, I don't know whether you're less likely to flood it or not. But the one thing I will tell you about a gravity fed is that you better be paying attention to how clean that carburetor bowl is, because the one time that needle valve sticks on a gravity fed unit, you will have every gallon of that gas in your motor. And that's exactly how you blow head gaskets, how you end up blowing bearings, and how you throw cranks in a lot of the newer motors. That is actually my theory. That's actually my ongoing theory that is why GT setups almost always have the tank in the back with a pulse pump with the battery up front. My theory is that they understand that with a lack of maintenance, if you end up with a stuck needle in your carb, you can actually continue to run with a stuck needle in your carb using a pulse pump setup. And you can run that way for years. Yes, it's not running right, but it'll run for years. On the other hand, if you have a gravity fed setup and you have that needle stick in the open position, all that gas, no ifs, ands, or buts, straight into the carb, straight into your motor, and it will flood out almost every single time when you try and start it until you clean out that carburetor. So that's my take on what you just said. I'm sure others will have their own opinion, but you threw it up onto the chat. I'm going to talk about it. Mr. Rallyman, I'm taking it from your discussion that Westwoods is a European brand. And I keep getting asked about Westwoods. To your knowledge, is there an equivalent of what Westwoods are to you here in America? There seems to be some discussion about whether Westwoods might be the equivalent of a Craftsman 2 from around the 80s, but they were painted orange or something like that. I've never been able to understand exactly what it is. When I end up looking up Westwoods, usually what I end up with is the really horribly bad sci-fi movie series about the robots in the Westwood town, whatever type thing. I don't usually tend to get much on tractors and stuff. And so I'm assuming that's Google understanding I'm in the United States and not Westwood in Ireland. If you happen to know, could somebody send me an email on that and like clarify? Because you guys come up in the chat with a lot more often lately. The grass cutter has an independent choke. Also, the new engine has pressure lubrication, so I got to do a remote oil filter mount, and I think you are referring to automatic choke. Now, it's not automatic because you got to slide it up. It's like a manual choke on an old-fashioned carbureted truck. Yeah. I'm not sure what it's actually called. I'm going to have to go and see what the salespeople call them on Amazon and stuff. I'll go through a bunch of them and see if I can find out what that's actually called, because that's bugging me now. That'll end up being my middle of the night. I can't go to bed until I can finally figure this out topic, I guess. Oh, speaking of that, on the remote oil filter mount, have you guys seen that some of the I believe it's the 21 horsepower V twins, they actually have the oil oil filter location. They actually have a screw-on diversion cap that goes on some of them to make them fit into the chassis that they're going into. I wonder whether one of those screw-on diversion caps, I haven't ended up with one of those dead yet, so I haven't dared to take that cap off and see what's actually underneath it. But I wonder if those would actually work for that kind of thing, whether maybe you could tap into it in order to create a relocation or something like that. You know, just throwing that out there as a side note. Some of you might happen to go and have a lawn tractor junkyard and you could take a look. They're usually the black top 21 horsepower V twin Briggs. I've been seeing them more and more often. I just haven't had one blown up and dared to go and take that off and see what's underneath. But I'm betting it's just a flow-through cap. But there's no reason if it isn't a flow-through cap that you couldn't port it, block it, and then be able to have your remote filter somewhere. Or even better, you could have an inline filter with a cooler. That would be a heck of an upgrade. Let's see. Is the super old lawn tractor that you and John fixed still working? Yes, it is. It's got a bunch of little things that need to be sorted out, and I've been trying to finish out the summer into fall season of stuff that I do with John before we get into working on that more. Because I try to let John finish out as much of the power wheels and electrical battery stuff as he would like, as long as the temperature will stay above 45 degrees. At about 45 degrees, those sealed lead acid batteries immediately just plummet in capability. The sealed lead acid batteries, the moment you get below 40 degrees, I would bet the runtime on one of those power wheels probably, an average runtime is probably about 2 hours on most of the 24-volt setups. Once it drops below 40 degrees, especially the closer to freezing it gets, I bet it probably drops to 15 minutes at the best. So I tend to let him run that kind of stuff out, and then we get back to projects that have to do with gas. I know a bunch of you follow because of the gas-powered power wheel. John and I have a ton of ideas for upgrades for that this winter. There are all kinds of different things we can't wait to play with on that this winter. And I'm really looking forward to getting back into that build and working on it. That build, when we were out at the cabin, was the one thing John definitely talked about the most on getting back to and hoping it was here and everything else. And so I can't wait now that he's got more of an understanding of driving and stuff like that. I can't wait to go and give it just a little bit more gusto and maybe a few other upgrades that, you know, everybody's got to play with the toys and upgrade the toys. You know, you get a new truck, you got to go and put some stuff on it and make it personal. And I think John has hit that point that he's a capable enough driver that it's time to check in on that idea. All right, let me see. So we got a few more minutes here. Let's see if we can go down through and see what we got. Let's see. Sabers are not. All right. So before we end up in a blanket statement here, I would like to clarify. Sabers are a sub-brand of John Deere. Not all Sabers are MTDs, but there aren't any Sabers that are actually John Deere. You got to watch your front spindles on your Saber and look to see whether they are Murray spindles or whether they are MTD spindles. There are Sabers that are Murray based that actually aren't too bad. And then there are MTD Sabers where people spend way too much money for them just because it says John Deere. The Murray Sabers have the same exact problem that the bug-eyed Murrays always had. They use a 96.5 inch belt. If you put a 96 on, it won't want to go and come out. It won't want to clutch out, and you will run into stuff. If you put a 97 on, most of the time it'll decide to throw the belt continuously. You have to put a 96.5 on, and you have to make sure every one of those stupid, dumb belt retainers that is around the transmission goes in correctly, that it's not bent, and that you make sure they're tight. Otherwise, you're going to hate that tractor, and then some guy like me is going to buy it. He's going to spend about a half an hour tightening all of those, and then he's going to sell it for $300 to $400. So pay attention which one you're buying. Make sure whether it's a Murray front end or whether it's an MTD front end. There's a huge difference in quality and capability. Let's see here. Yes, the GT1855 will be making a return to the channel with a twist. We'll see whether you purists end up liking my twist. Let's see here. Okay, well, you guys discuss whether a Saber is a piece of junk or not. We'll scroll down through here a little bit. Let's see. In spring, I hope to find a Craftsman 2. Yeah, I like the Craftsman 2s. Just watch out for whether it's got a 930 in it. I've literally seen 930s explode just attempting to mow a lawn. Okay? So if you're going to modify something in order to actually go off-road or whatever, avoid the 930. If it's got a 930 in it, the only thing I ever do is I build it and I sell it to mow a lawn. I don't ever modify 930s to go off-road anymore. Let's see. I never knew that Craftsman was brought to Australia. I never knew until some guy reached out to me that apparently Craftsmans are sold in the Keys off of Florida. Apparently, Craftsman is one of the very few lawn tractors that you can actually buy in the Caribbean Keys. I've had tons of people end up coming in and talking with me on my Lt1000 videos. Apparently, Lt2000s were Lt2000s, Lt4000s, and Lt1000s were apparently sold down in the Caribbeans for quite a while, and a bunch of people still keep them up and running down there by importing the parts from Florida in order to keep them running. And, you know, never knew until YouTube and people started getting a hold of me. I love Kohler engines. However, Briggs engines are much easier to swap than a Kohler engine. Couldn't agree more. I will never understand why it is that Kohler decided to go so overly complicated on most of their single cylinder stuff. It's never made sense to me. Most of your single cylinder 14 horsepower Kohlers are 3 times more complicated and unnecessarily so than most of your Briggs and Strattons. Never have understood why they did that. Let's see. All right, well, apparently you guys are into it to argue about Kohlers versus Briggs and stuff like that. I get, you know, whatever floats your boat. I don't care. Engine's an engine as far as I'm concerned. When you're 2 miles deep out in the woods, I don't care whether you got a Kohler or a Briggs. Anything is better than pushing and pulling that machine back out. Let's see. Okay, let's see if we can finish out what we got going on here. My dad has a Cub Cadet lawn tractor, and when he started, the exhaust is very, very loud, sounds like a motorcycle. Most likely the internal baffle on the muffler is rotted out, would be my bet. That's one of the workarounds that I tell people as far as the single cylinder Briggs and Strattons. If you want to still have the muffler baffling, I mean, if you want to still have the muffler and have it sound a little bit better, but yet not quite straight pipe, is you take off the bottom piece. So if we've got our GoPro here and you've got that bottom piece that comes out of your Briggs and Stratton single, if you take that piece and you unbolt it or you drill the rivets out or whatever is holding it, usually on the inside there is a baffle, and you can usually drill a couple of holes through that baffle to open it up a little bit, and it'll make the machine louder and have slightly better flow while still having the muffler assembly on there in order to redirect the exhaust down under the machine. The problem with that is if you're in a state like I am that has regulations on how loud your exhaust is allowed to be, then if you get pulled over by a game warden, yeah, you can still end up with a major ticket. So you're not straight piping it. You're just modifying the muffler just a little bit. But if you're going to ride them on ATV trails, check to find out what your ATV law is first, because even muffler modification in a state like Maine can get you a major fine. So pay attention to that. Read your laws before you do stuff. Rally Man, have a good night. Glad you stopped in. Always good info, dude. I appreciate when you come in. Let's see. All right, let's see. You guys have kind of turned this into an argument thing going on over in the chats and stuff. So unfortunately, I'm trying to sort through who's babbling about what engine is better than what and whatever, and then sort down through what's the actual questions. So I apologize for those that are waiting for me to go and read somebody's question off. What's the difference between an Lt1000 and Lt4000s? The Lt4000 usually had certain upgrades in it. The Lt1000 was usually things like spicers, some of the 930s and stuff like that. The Lt4000s usually had cast iron front end bars on them for the pivot, which were way better. So did the Lt2000. Some of your Lt4000s are actually hydros, and they're the better quality torque masters instead of the 316 hydros. The other thing about Lt4000s is a lot of your Lt1000s were crotch shift down in between the legs, whereas your Lt4000 was usually a side shift. The Lt4000s that were hydros that were side shift, you can actually modify the side shift in order to put in, you can actually modify the side shift bracket underneath in order to change gears on a standard transmission also, which is really easy to do. If you got a welder and some scrap metal, it's a 5-minute thing in order to change over. That's your big differences between Lt1000s and Lt4000s. The other reason why I tell people to target an Lt1 instead of an Lt4 sometimes is that the LT1 only retailed originally for a price ballpark of around $900 to $1,000, whereas the LT4000 originally retailed into about $1,400 to $1,600. So if the person has owned it for a significant period of time, then they probably paid a significant amount for it, and they have a hard time coming to terms with the fact that it's only a $50 tractor. Whereas if they only spent a very limited amount on it, then they usually come to terms with it being a $50 hunk of junk a lot easier than they do if they bought it for a significant amount more. That's part of the reason why it is I tend to avoid Cub Cadets. I tend to avoid Cub Cadets and I tend to avoid John Deere's because people pay for the name. A 1045 Cub Cadet is literally the exact same thing as a yard machine. And yet, because it is a Cub Cadet, you spend $400 more for the fact somebody painted it white. That is the reason why I tend to avoid them. And Sabre is a prime example. It is usually a Murray or an MTD that has a John Deere little bit of print on it and a little bit of John Deere green or whatever on it. And so therefore they charged an extra $400 rather than just buying an MTD. And so you got to watch out for that. Just keep it in mind. Let's see. I like Craftsman 2s. Craftsman 2s had some of the best splicers in them. The 3600 series splicers, if you find one of those, they're based, ironically, they're based off of a 930 Peerless, but when they cloned the 930, they actually changed where the casing reinforcement is to different than the 930 uses in order to get around copyright law. And when they did, they actually made a better transaxle case. So I actually prefer to see a splicer any day than I do to see a Peerless 930. Just my own personal dealings dealing with it. If you saw the lawn tractor video from this summer where the tractor's rear end is sitting rather V'd and everything, that is a classic example of what I find when it comes to 930s. All right, so guys, we're at the end of the chat for today. I tried to do the best I could to go and keep up with what you guys were doing and stuff like that, but we're at the end of our usual time. It's 8 o'clock. My voice is starting to go and give out, and I've managed to run out of my drinks that I provided myself in order to try and keep my voice. So I hope everybody enjoys yourself. I hope everybody has a good night, and thank you very much for joining the chat. We'll be live here again in 2 weeks. And as I said before in the chat, please check out Pullerbear Ed. I posted a link to his channel down in the description. Please check him out, subscribe, tell him I sent you, and have a good night.